And opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
We are not using the same app or the same vendor as was used in Iowa.
Tonight in our caucus one-on-one special, Nevada Democrats change course. What we know about their plans after they scrapped plans to use apps to count delegates.
We want to have a seat on the table. We want to have a voice.
How the party is using caucus training to recruit voters and voices that have not been heard in the past. Plus,
well, she's fierce, fun, and fabulous. And why wouldn't you want her in the White House?
Also, we walk you through a mock caucus of our own so you know what to expect on Caucus Day. Thank you for joining us for this Caucus 101 special. By the end of it, you are going to be a caucus expert, and you will have plenty of trivia to wow your friends at parties. I'm Brian Loftus.
And I'm Steve Sebelius.
And I'm Denise Valdez. The countdown is on. Early voting just a week away, and Caucus Day is in 2 weeks. So first off, a lot of the special is going to focus on the Democratic caucus, and Steve is going to tell us why that is.
Well, Denise, that's because there won't be a Republican caucus. The Nevada Republicans are not holding an actual caucus for party members. Instead, the Republican Central Committee is voting on February 22nd at its meeting in Pahrump. Members are expected to bind their delegates to President Trump. State Party Chairman Michael McDonald says Republicans are overwhelmingly for Trump, and the party wants to focus all its energy on the general election.
Now, at the top of everyone's mind is making sure our caucus runs a lot smoother than the one in Iowa. The first caucus in the country was held on Monday, but there was an error with the app they used, then reports of miscounting by hand. It was on Thursday. The AP said they still cannot declare a winner in Iowa. Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders appear to have won the most delegates in the state, though who finished first is not finalized. They were followed by Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden. The Iowa Democratic Caucus director says the initial technical problems were caused by a coding error in the new app.
So results from Iowa's failed caucus on Monday still aren't complete. Meantime, here in Nevada, the caucus is just 2 weeks away. And as the I-Team's Vanessa Murphy found out, there is still no final plan, but we have learned more about a tool that they are not going to be using. Vanessa?
Well, a spokeswoman for Nevada Democrats confirms no app will be used, period. Nevada had planned on using the same app which failed in Iowa, and now the party has decided to stay away from that technology altogether.
They want to run the country, but they can't even do a caucus.
Nevada State Republican Party Chairman Michael McDonald is calling out Democrats for the failed Iowa caucus Monday. As of Friday, results still weren't complete in the Hawkeye state.
If I'm a Democrat that's running for president, I'm so upset right now because it hurt everybody going into New Hampshire. It hurt them coming into Nevada.
But the Nevada State Democratic Party insists what happened in Iowa won't happen here. On Friday, a spokesman told me the party would not be using an app for caucus day or early voting, and her team was testing different options, although she would not specify what they are. She did not agree to an on-camera interview, but caucus director Shelby Wiltz did Tuesday.
We're working hard right now to evaluate the redundancies and backup reporting systems that we have already had in place to evaluate the best plan forward.
Earlier that day, Chairman William McCurdy released a statement saying the app used in Iowa would not be used in Nevada. The party previously paid the company Shadow Inc., which created it, and now the party has to switch gears.
I've been caucusing since the caucus started here in 08.
Michelle Gack is a precinct captain who's also canvassing for her presidential hopeful of choice, Elizabeth Warren. Despite the lack of a plan in Nevada, she says she is confident.
Okay, let's go with Larry.
The caucus will run smoothly.
I really don't think there's going to be any problem.
Precinct captains like Michelle Gack are still going through training since there are many aspects to training other than tallying results. We are hearing concerns, though, about early voting as to how those votes will be incorporated at precincts on caucus day. But the spokeswoman for Nevada Democrats insists early voting will still happen. Steve and Denise, back to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Well, as you can see, Democratic leaders are doing everything they can to make sure voters participate in the Nevada caucus. That includes certain groups of people that often skip the caucus and only vote in the general election, if at all.
8 News Now reporter Orko Manna explains what's being done to encourage Asian Americans across the valley to participate in this important political process.
The Asian American Pacific Islander Democratic Caucus, or AAPI-DC, is the Asian arm of the Nevada Democratic Party. The group understands the caucus process might be difficult to understand, especially for a demographic not usually involved in politics. That's why last month it hosted its first ever mock caucus to recruit Asians in the community to voice their vote. An educational experience filled with fun and food, all meant to motivate the Valley's Asian population to participate at the polls.
It's a learning process for all of us, but that doesn't mean we can't be involved. 21-year-old
Caitlin Gachalian and this whole room of Asian Americans are getting a crash course on the Nevada caucus. They're choosing between different Asian foods in place of presidential candidates. Caitlin is excited to vote in 2020, saying she's sick of staying silent.
No one wants to hear our voices, yet we are still here, part of the community, creating community, and creating opportunities that get us more civically engaged to get our voices heard.
She's extending that excitement to her mother, Catherine, who recently registered as a Democrat for the first time.
Because of my daughter, you know, I'm more involved now than I did in the past, and we're trying to involve more of our family.
Catherine says in the past she did what many Asians do, stay out of politics.
If it doesn't affect our lives, we try to be quiet and just accept what the majority will give us.
But with the growing group, that's not the case anymore.
Population has a big impact.
Fayaz Raja is the chairperson for the AAPI-DC. He says with Asians making up 10% of Nevada's population and that number expected to grow even more, now is the time to stand up by literally doing so at the Nevada caucus later this month.
It's just going very, very important for us to have a understanding that we can educate our the community members so they can understand how the process works.
And although the caucus is for Democrats, the bigger picture is to inspire involvement regardless of party preference.
We want to have a seat on the table. We want to have a voice.
As delicious delicacies are decided upon, the mock caucus winds down. But for Caitlin, Catherine, and many others, they're realizing what power each of them can have by rising up at the ballot box.
One person creates waves, and that's what I'm trying to do with these small steps. I'm one person. Imagine what multiple people can do.
The AAPI-DC of Nevada is also making sure that Asian Americans here in the Valley are ready to go on caucus day or for early caucusing. They're actively working with different organizations to ensure all voters are registered. In the studio, Orko Manna, 8 News Now.
So if you early vote instead of going the day of, there are ballots available in Tagalog as well.
Nevada is the first state in the country to try early voting in the caucus. Next on Caucus One-on-One, we will break down how that is going to work and how the results will be factored in on caucus day.
Welcome back to our Caucus One-on-One special. We are walking you through Nevada's presidential nominating process.
Here are some basic rules to take part. You must be a registered Democrat to vote in that party's caucus. However, if you are not currently registered as a Democrat but want to take part in the caucus, there is same-day registration. So head on over to your precinct, and on Election Day, you can switch party affiliation or register to vote right then and there. If you plan to do that, make sure you head over early. Give yourself adequate time to be in the room before the doors close at 12 noon sharp. Now, this year, the Nevada Democrats will be making history by doing something that has never been done by a state that has a caucus. That is early voting.
It'll create a bit of a hybrid where the early voting works kind of like a primary. Early voting will run February 15th through February 18th at more than 80 sites throughout the state. Most are open between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. on those days, but there are changes depending on the location, so make sure you check the hours before you go. Now, you cast a ballot like a regular election, except you indicate between 3 and 5 candidates in the order of your preference. I asked Caucus Director Shelby Wiltz how it works and why the party is doing early voting. Tell me how the early voting works. How does that happen?
Yeah, so well, firstly, we're incredibly excited to be having an early vote process. As you said, this is really going to mean that students, people who are working multiple jobs, rural voters, right, who may have to drive a little bit further to get to their caucus day location, and then just anyone that may not be able to show up for a few hours at a time on caucus day will still have the ability to have their voice heard in the process. So we're really excited to make it expansive. And the other reason that this was important for us to do is because we know how much Nevadans love to early vote in a general election. And so this is a really great way for us to continue that tradition and to make sure that our caucus process really reflects our state.
It's like regular election voting.
Yes.
You just go to the voting center.
It's very, very much like early voting in a general election. You show up to any location in your county, you check in, you cast your vote, and you leave. So it is really a much shorter process. And then once you've provided your list of preferences, your vote is going to be counted on caucus day in your precinct alongside your neighbors.
And how does that work? So unlike a regular election, you just come and vote for one person. Here, you actually get to vote for multiple people. You can vote to up to how many people can you vote for? You
can go up to 5.
Up to 5. So your top 5 choices in order of who you want.
That's right. And the reason that we're asking folks to make multiple selections is because this is a caucus process. So and we're going to count everybody's vote equally on caucus day. So what that means is it's possible that your first choice candidate might not be viable in your caucus, in your precinct caucus on February 22nd. So if your first choice isn't viable at your caucus when we put your vote alongside your neighbors, then we will automatically move you down to your second choice or your third choice or your fourth choice.
Got it.
But we'll always respect your first choice candidate.
The hope is that this will draw new voters in addition to getting others who maybe are intimidated by the caucus day process to vote. Denise?
All right, guys, thank you. Just a neighborhood meeting of sorts. Coming up next, we'll have a mock caucus in our studio, and we will show you what it would look like on caucus day.
Welcome back to Caucus 101. We have given you some of the basics about how the caucus works, but now it's time to actually show you.
So we actually did a mock caucus walking you through here, our Channel 8 studios, so you can see what to expect. Take a look. The first thing that will happen is that you will elect a precinct chair and a secretary. We've already done that. We've chosen Brian Loftus as our precinct chair. He's going to walk us through today. So just think of this as a local gathering. You're not going to see any candidate names. Actually, we're using the names of Muppets just to kind of keep it nice and fair. Next, supporters will actually start to make their case for their candidate, and that's where the chair comes in.
Denise, this local gathering of voters, this is really a communal, collaborative process. And the first candidate we're going to hear from, Miss Piggy, we're going to hear this voter making their case for candidate Miss Piggy. Kristen?
Well, she's fierce, fun, and fabulous. And why wouldn't you want her in the White House?
Short and sweet, succinct, right to the point, supporting their Miss Piggy. We're going to set it back for the next step of the Nevada caucus. Over to you, Denise.
All right, so at this point, everyone has actually spoken for their particular candidate. Then people are actually physically going to separate into groups for the candidate of their choice.
So at this point, that is going to happen, that early voting with individuals, Nevada voters being added to the group that they support. Again, the candidates represented by Muppets, and they will now do that. They will move into the group they support, and we will begin that process right now. Nevada voters, go behind the candidate you support.
All right, so then they actually will take the totals, and anyone who doesn't get 15%, like you mentioned, Brian, is not going to be considered a viable candidate. This is also when the early voting numbers are going to go into each one of these candidates as well.
Folks, let's check in with the votes, and we begin with the non-viable candidates. They did not meet the 15% threshold. They are Gonzo, Animal, Fozzie the Bear, as well as Miss Piggy. They did not get enough Nevada voters to meet that 15%, so I need to take their signs now. Sorry, Miss Piggy. And I will take the signs of the other candidates, Gonzo, Animal, and Fozzie the Bear. Whoever did the sign making, well done. But these candidates, again, did not meet the minimum threshold. The candidates that did, as we can see, meeting 15%, Kermit and Oscar the Grouch. Now, what do the supporters of the non-viable candidates do? They will now lend their support between Kermit and Oscar the Grouch. We're going to have Oscar the Grouch pitched by one of their supporters. Ron?
Oscar, you mean?
Go ahead.
Thank you. As Oscar, first of all, I make no apologies for being a one-issue candidate, and that's affordable housing. That's my platform, beginning and end, is affordable housing is what we are in favor of. Even if it's a trash can, it's a house for somebody, and it is for me, and it has been for years. So please join me as not only a viable candidate, but the best.
Affordable housing, a big issue for Oscar the Grouch. Now, the supporters of the other candidates will lend their support between Kermit and Oscar the Grouch, and we begin that process now. Go ahead, voters.
So that's what it should look like once you actually re-caucus, and it looks like we actually have 2 candidates that actually meet the 15% threshold, and that actually could happen at your precinct.
That's right, Denise. After the re-caucusing, we can see Oscar the Grouch and Kermit have met that 15% with their Nevada supporters. Next step is they will nominate their delegates and the alternates to go to the county convention. Denise?
And hopefully it'll be that smoothly at your precinct as well.
We're hoping so. Delegates picked in the mock caucus will go to county convention, as we mentioned, then on to the state convention. The end result of that process will be 36 pledged national delegates that will go to the national convention in Milwaukee.
But that's not all the delegates. Steve is going to tell us more about what we are commonly known as what they call super delegates. Steve?
That's right, Denise. In addition to those pledged delegates we told you about, there will be 12 unpledged delegates, often called super delegates, who will go to the national convention as well. Now, they tend to vote along with who the rest of the state pick, but it is possible that they can pick whoever they want. Here's how they're broken down. The superdelegates include the governor, Steve Sisolak, and Nevada's 5 Democratic members of Congress, Senators Catherine Cortez Masto and Jackie Rosen, and Representatives Dina Titus, Stephen Horsford, and Susie Lee. There's also a party leader and 5 members of the Democratic National Committee. Now, due to a rule change, the superdelegates will not vote until a second ballot at the National Convention, if one is necessary. We should also note that Republicans don't have superdelegates, so if they were holding a caucus, just those pledged delegates would go to the National Convention.
Well, Nevada caucuses, they've had some controversy over the years.
So I think it just proved that it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you can find ways to make things messy.
UNLV history professor Michael Green takes us through the short but eventful history of caucuses in Nevada. Nevada's caucus history has had some bumps and bruises along the way. We became a caucus when we moved up to an early state back in 2008, but there have been plenty of contentious moments since then.
I talked with a UNLV Associate Professor of History, Dr. Michael Green, about the short but very packed history of presidential caucuses in Nevada.
Switching from a primary to a caucus was the brainchild of Senator Harry Reid. The bold move boosted our political clout.
Nevada went to the caucus for 2008 and became the number 3 state after Iowa and New Hampshire, who had this long tradition, of course, of having a considerable influence.
Now, Nevada shares in some of that early influence. Since we're one of the first, the Silver State is being courted earlier and often. Our impact is greater, too.
You can point to 2008, the first time for Democrats, when Obama and Clinton pretty much split Nevada. I mean, it was very close. But at that point, Clinton seemed destined to be the candidate, and Obama was certainly making inroads. This was, I think, a sign of his onward advance.
Fast forward to 2016, when Hillary Clinton was now facing Bernie Sanders. The outcome of Nevada's caucus delivered a blow and a blessing.
She won Nevada not by a ton. You don't look at the numbers and say, oh, this was a wipeout. But political experts like to think of momentum as incredibly important, and I suppose it is. And it sort of reduced the Sanders momentum at that moment and helped Clinton.
Clinton got Nevada's delegates. Sanders supporters got sore. And for the state's top party leaders, the fallout was ugly and personal.
The chair of the state party at the time wound up getting a bunch of what we could conservatively call vile messages because some Sanders supporters distributed her phone number. So she was getting all kinds of just lovely texts. There was apparently some threat of violence.
In our short time as a caucus state, we've had our ups and downs. Republicans ran into trouble in 2012 when the race between Mitt Romney and Ron Paul got dirty.
The Paul people came in and were some of them were trying to vote a second time, some of them were just trying to get their man in there. That's part of politics, folks. So I think it just proved that it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you can find ways to make things messy.
So we've always been a caucus state, but in 2008 we just moved way up in the calendar. So Steve, with that history in mind, let's talk about some of the things that give people some pause. First up, how do people end up with a bigger group of people than another candidate at their caucus site, but then they get the same number of delegates?
Yeah, that's caucus math. Now, oftentimes that's due to rounding. Caucus leaders determine the total percentage of voters caucusing for a particular candidate, and then they round that decimal percentage up to the next whole number. But it's usually not a significant enough rounding to award another pledged delegate.
Oh, okay.
All right, Denise talked about the 2016 Democratic Convention and how the delegate total shifted between the county and state conventions in 2016. So, Steve, how did that happen?
Well, it all comes down to turnout. Turnout matters, but it matters at the state convention, too. According to the state Democratic Party, Sanders had about 2,100 delegate slots to Clinton's 1,700 delegate slots or so. However, only 1,662 Sanders delegates showed up compared to 1,693 Clinton delegates. So in a caucus, delegates still had to show up at the next convention, or the other team can put people in those slots. Now, we should note that because of the controversy in 2016, that rule was changed. Now delegates are locked in on caucus day.
This guy's like the political Google. All the answers right here. So let's talk about when you can start voting. Early voting starts on February 15th right through February 18th. You can go to any of the sites during early voting to cast your vote. On caucus day, you must go to your precinct.
Now, if you don't know where yours is, we do have a link on 8newsnow.com, and it's important if you're early. If you show up at 12:01 or 12:02, it's too late, so get there on time.
That's our show. Thanks for watching.